All right, let's talk about voting in America. It sounds pretty simple, right? But how we actually vote is, well, it's complicated. Today, we're going to dig into the nitty-gritty of voter ID laws and mail-in ballots, all based on a really interesting analysis from Shasta Unfiltered.
Okay, let's just jump straight into it with a big number, 36. What's that? Well, that's how many states right now ask you for some kind of ID when you go to vote. So yeah, right away, you can see this is a huge deal. It's the rule in most of the country.
But, and this is a big but, that number 36 doesn't tell the whole story, not even close. It's not like all 36 of those states do things the same way. The rules can be wildly different depending on where you live, and that's exactly what we need to get into.
Okay, so this brings us to the US voting map. You've really got to understand this one key thing. In America, election rules aren't set nationally. Nope. It's mostly up to the states. And what you end up with is this incredible patchwork quilt of different rules and systems all over the country.
So to make sense of this, we need to get a couple of terms straight. Voter ID laws basically come in two flavors, strict and non-strict. Strict is exactly what it sounds like. If you show up without the exact right ID, you have to jump through some extra hoops later to make sure your vote counts. Non-strict is a bit more flexible. It gives you other ways to prove who you are right then and there, maybe by signing a statement or showing something like a recent utility bill. And here's where it gets really interesting. In the swing states, you can see just how different things are. Look, most of them require an ID, but then you've got Pennsylvania, a big exception. And the mail-in rules? Totally all over the map. You have places like Arizona and Michigan with no excuse mail-in, but then on the flip side, there's Wisconsin, where you need a specific, verified reason. It's that patchwork system we were just talking about, clear as day. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about that other big variable, mail-in voting. Just like with ID laws, there are basically two different camps. First, you've got the excuse-required states. Here, you need a good official reason to vote by mail, like you're sick or out of town. Then there are the no-excuse states, where any registered voter can get a mail-in ballot, no questions asked. Sometimes they even send one to you automatically. All right, before we zoom out and look at the rest of the world, we're going to take a quick pause for a word from the folks who put this analysis together. So yeah, today's deep dive is based on reporting from Shasta Unfiltered. Their mission is to serve the North State with honest news and entertainment. Okay, we're back. So we've seen how messy the U.S. system is, but how does it compare to the rest of the world? Do other democracies do it this way? Let's take a look. And wow, this first number is pretty mind-blowing. According to the data in the source article, get this, 46 out of 47 countries in Europe require a government-issued photo ID to vote. 46 out of 47. And it's not just Europe. If you look at the OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, a group of major developed countries, the same data shows that 33 out of 38 of them also require voter ID. And we're not just talking about a simple ID check. The source points out some really interesting examples. Like in Mexico, they use biometric cards with your fingerprint on them. India has its own special electoral photo ID cards. And even places we might think are a lot like us, like Canada and Germany, yep, both require government ID to vote.
So what about mail-in voting? How does that compare globally? Well, according to the article, it turns out that voting by mail is actually way more restricted in other countries. It's much rarer and more controlled than it is in a lot of U.S. states.
And check out this example. It's pretty stark. France literally banned mail-in voting inside the country way back in 1975. Why? Because they were worried about fraud. And they're not alone. Lots of other countries, from Mexico to most of Scandinavia, either don't allow it at all or have very strict limits on it. Okay, so we've looked at the U.S. patchwork, and we've looked at the rest of the world. What does it all mean? What's the big conclusion from the source article? Well, the main argument the article makes is that the U.S. is kind of an outlier. It concludes that some states have rules that are way more permissive, meaning they make it easier to vote, than what you'll find in most other major democracies. So, following that logic, the article's final takeaway is this. If the U.S. were to add more voter ID rules or put more limits on mail-in ballots, it wouldn't be some radical step. The article argues it would actually just bring the U.S. more in line with what it describes as the norm for democracies around the world. And all of this really brings us to the fundamental question, doesn't it? When you look at all these different ways of doing things here in the U.S. and in other countries, it all comes down to this: where do you find that perfect balance between making sure voting is accessible to everyone who's eligible while also making sure it's as secure as possible? It's the big question at the center of this whole conversation.